Thank you for the time, man. How you been?
I've been good, running around like a nut promoting this special. And it's been a year from the time I shot it until now. And now I don't know what to do with my life. I didn't realize I have ADHD and mild depression. And when I get going, I realize, oh no, I just need things to do. Like I get depressed because I'm a comic with 23 free hours a day. But when I'm out and I'm doing interviews all day and traveling, it's like I feel like I'm on top of the world.
So I've heard comedians talk about how getting up on stage is a form of therapy. So is promoting your special because you're having these conversations about yourself over and over and over again on all these different podcasts.
That's right. I've discovered a lot about myself, especially doing Jay Okerson's. I found out that I'm bald, that I look like a worm, that somebody microwaved my neck, that my voice sounds like a woman. So, yeah, it's a journey of self discovery.
Well, I appreciate all the podcasts you've been on because it makes my show prep a little bit easier. I hear things about you that I want to talk about, but also not
Oh,
having you repeat yourself necessarily too much. I am going to have you repeat yourself though with regards to your Mets fandom because you are a
okay.
Mets fan, and man, you guys are in a pretty good position right now in the NLCS. Feeling pretty good about your chances of making it back to your first World Series in what 20 years or so.
86. I was there in 86 when we had season tickets when I was growing up. Or, my father was a broadcaster and his station covered the Mets. And so we went to all the games and then he was friends with Rusty Staub was one of his best friends and Keith Hernandez and Wally Backman and they used to come up and play golf and I would caddy for them. And so when they got into the World Series, we went to she's up. We went to Boston. I was going to college in Boston. My dad came up for game four, and it was just magic. It was kind of like I realized that my sports fandom had just peaked and that there was never going to be an event in sports that could match the emotions of what I just felt. And so since then, I've become sort of more of a playoffs fan.
Yeah.
I don't, I appreciate the clock now. I like that the game is faster, but like a lot of people, baseball is a big investment in time.
Yeah, you and I talked about this a couple of summers ago. I'm with you on that. As somebody who is in sports radio, my threshold for watching regular season baseball, basketball, or hockey games is next to nothing right now. Like, I'm an old school Texas Rangers fan who, much like you, I went to a ton of games as a kid and I loved watching them win the World Series last year, but I'm not going to try and fake anybody out into thinking that I started watching that team play before it got to October. It's a
Right,
lot of
right.
fun, but it also, I guess, wouldn't have hurt as badly had they not ultimately won it in the end.
Right. And I have friends like my friend John Sorelli who he's got season tickets and he goes on the road, he travels with them. And I talk to him and he can barely contain himself. This series has been all their comebacks from behind and you know, um Lindor's grand slam in was that game? I forget which game that was, but
It was a clincher. Was it a wild
it was
card
the
round clincher,
clincher. Yeah,
maybe?
yeah, yeah. Right, right. So yeah, it's great. It's great to watch again. And it really is. Baseball's got a nice rhythm to it. I know I have a whole bit about how it's too slow, but then when push comes to shove and I start getting into it, it's pretty exciting.
Well, the great thing about baseball too is it really is the storyteller sport because you have so much
Yeah,
downtime. That's why Vin Scully was not only so good at what he did, but he was so good at what he did. He didn't even need anybody else in the booth because he was just
right.
able to tell stories to himself in between pitches or in between game action.
Yeah. And I miss it. Like I went to game one on Sunday night at Dodger Stadium and I really missed hearing the play-by-play. I think I want to be one of those nerds that goes to the game and wears a headset, listen to AM radio. It's enjoyable, but you're not appreciating what's going on in stats. It's a numbers game. It's just, without the numbers, it's just one guy after the other getting up and somebody gets a hit and, you know, But I was shocked that at Dodger Stadium there was so many Mets jerseys. I'm like, are you nuts? Have you seen what happens in this? People get killed in this stadium.
Yeah, massive head injury at best. It leaves you with a speech
Yeah,
impediment for the rest of your
R
life.
right, right. So, yeah,
So,
I'll watch from the sidelines.
so your dad was a radio guy, and I think that makes a lot of sense having listened to a fair number of Fitzdog radio episodes and then also the Sunday papers. You're able to really seamlessly go back and forth between being a conversationalist and somebody who does ask people about themselves too. Do you feel like what your dad did for a living that is making a profound impact on you and your ability as a broadcaster, even though your most obvious job, or I guess your day job, is as a stand-up comedian?
I think he helped with both, actually. Like I go back and first of all, I have all these tapes that were logged when he was on air. I forget what they're called, but I listened to them.
Demos, like
No,
demo
not
tape.
demos, scratches or whatever. You probably don't know because it was back when it was on reel to reel.
Oh
He
yeah, where
literally,
you had to literally cut it up to splice it together. Yeah.
yes. And so I had those converted to digital.
Hmm.
And I listened to them and I think, oh my God, he has the same. I think that the gift I got from him is that I come off as a really nice guy and it allows me to say horrific things and get away with it. And so I listen to him and even our voice quality. I think our ability to laugh easily, we have a similar laugh. And I didn't study him, but he was on in the background my whole life. You know, I grew up with him on in the radio. And then when I was a kid, he loved emceeing like benefit events. He would, charity events. He would put on a tuxedo and he had all of his notes. And I have his notes. I found them after he died in his dresser. And it was like it was the same kind of notes I have before I do stand up. They were bits and they were, and he wasn't a stand up comedian, but he had the same stories, did the same kind of crowd work that I would do, which was like insulting, but from a loving way. And I think I watched that and I was always a fan of stand up, but seeing your father do something, people talk about Nepo babies. It's like, yeah, it's the family business. Whatever you see your father doing for a living or your mother, you think to yourself, oh, yeah, I can do that. That's done. What did your father do?
You had well, my dad was he did financing for car dealerships, and I wanted nothing to do with that. I was good at math, but I also
Yeah.
wanted nothing to do with the 9 to 5 grind that comes with that, and slogging away for corporate America. I don't know where I got the radio thing from, but I do love it, and it was a passion from early on. Also, when my friends when we were teenagers and they were listening to music radio, I was listening to the new sports talk station in Dallas and like calling in and trying to do you know, bits for, somebody who is going through puberty and has a squeaky voice
Yeah.
still, and they could hear that I was on the younger side. But gradually, as I got into this world and started doing it as an adult, I found all my friends who thought I was a dork for going and buying these tapes of various radio bits that the station was doing. All of a sudden, they were jealous of me and the career path that I had taken.
Yeah. Right.
So it did kind of flip, but I completely relate to what your dad liked to do in terms of getting up and speaking in front of people, not just speaking into that microphone
Yeah.
theoretically to himself. Because I'm pretty good at that now. Like I talk with my kids about that because they're having to do public speaking in school. I've got a 10 and 8 year old, and it's just like, look, I understand how to do this, and I'm pretty good at it at this point. So if you guys want to get better, one, it takes work. You've gotten over the nerves part already, so it's just understanding little things like it's like with stand-up comedy where you try and make eye contact with everybody in the crowd, even though obviously you're never going to be able to do that. And just
Uh-huh.
understand what it is that you're going to say. Take breaths. Know that you may not get every word correct, but as long as you're not freaking out at the end of the day, people will still be really appreciative of the job that you've done. Whether it's getting up to tell jokes in your case, or speaking in front of a crowd if you're emceeing an event, or I mean, I spoke
Giving
up.
a giving a toast at a wedding.
Toasted a wed. I'm excellent at wedding toasts, and I'm really good speaking up at funerals too. I just spoke.
Oh, I kill at funerals. I get asked to speak at funerals for people I barely know. I'm like a ringer. I'm the guy in the bullpen. I'm the guy that they play Welcome to the Jungle as I'm walking up to the podium in front of the coffin.
So I just spoke for my granddad's funeral, and he's literally one of the two most important people in my life. And only one of us got to speak at this weird Episcopal church where there's like only one person gets to get up and talk on behalf of this man, and there's going to be this long church service. He wasn't
Yeah,
even religious of a guy, but
yeah,
it was so important to me, and I'm a good public speaker. I'm like, look, y'all, I know other people want to speak. Please let me be the person to do this.
yeah.
And you hate to say you killed a funeral speech, but I killed it, Greg. I did him honor, and it's something where I know he would have been nodding along and smiling and laughing at times at the points where he was supposed to laugh. And it has me wondering if I should start a new business now, where I am hiring myself out to speak at other people's funerals. But
Like
apparently,
a wedding crasher. You're a funeral crasher.
yeah.
Yeah.
Except I'm not trying to hit on any of the widows.
Oh,
At
let
least.
me tell you something. If you want to meet women, a funeral, they're so all the emotions are boiling at the surface, and they're vulnerable, they're sad, they need to be held. That's it.
I'll just have to bring my degenerate friend. Somebody's listening in the background right now. I'm
My
gonna
daughter just walked in and she said, "Nice, really nice." The things she's heard me say on my podcast, because my studio is the bonus room in the back of the house, and she has an apartment that's connected. She's 21, and oh my God, the stuff that she has heard me say, because I'm a pervert. There's something seriously wrong with me, and yeah, so she's learned a lot. She watched my special, and she was traumatized because it's about me having sex with her mother, and her mother telling me when to orgasm because she's already orgasmed.
Hmm.
And then I say I'm 58. I've been trying the whole time. She doesn't need to know that.
But you tried to shield them from the podcasts and the stand-up shows for the longest time. So eventually they have
I
to make that
did.
decision for themselves and realize what a horrific
Yeah.
mistake it was to subject themselves to it.
Well, I just point to this house and I go, "You see this? Yeah. How do you think it got paid for? How do you think the car that I gave you got paid for?"
That's right. I love hearing you
Yeah.
talk about being a parent because I think that much like you, I ran the opposite direction from what my dad was as a parent back in the 1980s and 1990s. For you, as somebody who is a quasi empty nester now, because the daughter lives to the attached unit, but you and your wife still have the home to yourselves in a sense.
Yeah.
What do you think the biggest challenge is for parents in 2024, Greg?
Well, I mean, for kids at my kids' age, it's just AI is just gobbling up all the jobs. And all of their friends tell me they send out 200 resumes, and if they get 3 responses, not jobs, responses, that's good. And then you go in for an interview, and the new thing now is they bring you back for 4, 5, 6 rounds of interviews before you get the job. And then the job is permalance and it has no benefits. And I mean, they're just going into a very difficult workforce right now. And so I say to them, the only way that you're going to guarantee work for yourself is to work for yourself. And you need to come up with a business model where you're tapping into something that you're passionate about, the kind of thing where when you have a choice between going to a party or staying at home and finishing a project, you're going to want to stay at home and finish the project because it's meaningful to you and you feel like there's something in your 20s. When you're in your early 20s, I found stand up when I was in college, and it just solved so many problems for me. I quit drinking because I knew that I couldn't be a good stand up if I was drunk every night, and I knew that I would get a DUI and then I wouldn't be able to get to gigs. And it just kept me out of trouble, and it gave me a sense of self-esteem. It There's an innate drive in us to challenge ourselves at a young age, to see how far we can go, what sacrifices we can make. So to stumble onto something that you're passionate about, it just makes your life have meaning at a young age, and it lets you find your potential. That's what you're trying to do at that age.
Well, doing hard stuff is good for you throughout your life, whether you're a little kid, and obviously things are harder when you're a little kid, but especially when you're an adult and we all start falling into our own comfort zones. And I would imagine that stand-up comedy, especially when you get to a point where you do release that first special and you're forced to start over from scratch, that's
Yeah.
as it gets, man. Because you start with a small amount of material and you eventually try and work that into 45 minutes or an hour or even more than that. I mean, that's got to be one of the greatest challenges on the planet, to make a room full of people laugh at just random crap that's coming off the top of your head.
Yeah, I basically had, like I said, I shot the special last about a year ago. So I had a year to come up with a new hour, because I knew that once the special came out, I didn't want people coming in and seeing me do the same material, because that means they're not coming back. Then they're going to be like, all right, this guy just doesn't write. So I have a new hour that I'm really excited about. And it's exactly what you say. Like, it makes me feel young again. It makes me feel like I challenged myself, I stepped up, and I remembered that the reason I love stand up and I got into stand up is that process of, like, I've got my phone, I got a notepad on my phone, and when I see something funny, I jot it down, and then I sit down and I write it out, then I bring it on stage and I record that, and then I listen to the recording and I see what changes I made, and it becomes this, it's like a pearl. There's just layers and layers and layers until finally, after years, you've got an hour that's really polished and punched up. And there's not a night that I go on stage that I don't have a piece of paper in my back pocket with, new ideas that I'm trying out. And that's really the joy of it.
I really miss the back pocket notepad. I put too much on my phone now, and I feel like a lot of it just ends up getting lost in the wash. But when you're
Yeah,
physically writing something down, it burns it into your brain a little bit more too, I feel like.
right, right, right. So, but that being said, I have a new hour, but I don't think people are going to want to hear my chunk on the Olympics much longer, or my Lebanese pager joke. Some of these jokes have a shelf life, so I need some jokes about, I guess, the playoffs, some football jokes.
Yeah, I mean those are gonna run dry here in the next couple of months as well.
Yeah.
I don't normally ask comedians for material, but what's the Olympic material since you're about to have to retire in the next month or so?
Well, I'm talking about watching the women's gymnastics, and and it's just because it's my favorite sport, and they're just such brave athletes, and they're beautiful. They're just specimens. They're thick, and they got the little leotards on, and they're bending over backwards and spreading their legs, and you're like, ah. And then the announcer comes on, and he's like, and Svetlana's from Poland, and she'll be 15 next week. And you're like, whoa, where's the remote? What am I listening? I thought it was women's. It's girls. Chris Hansen jumps out of my closet. What are you watching? NBC, I thought.
I'm taking my family to the Olympic gymnastics tour that's going on right now on Friday. So
Are
I'll
you really?
yeah, I'll make sure not to pay close attention to any of the athletes on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to watch your comments. You got to keep your comments based on the moves and not the looks.
Yeah, exactly. So me was shot here in Austin at the Comedy Mothership. I heard Joe mention when he first opened the club up that his thoughts on the design were specifically in part to make it easy to shoot specials there. Was your experience in shooting at the Mothership that it was a great spot to shoot a stand-up special?
It was ideal because my special before that, I shot in like a 1,600 seat theater with a balcony. And it was just, I watch it and I look little on stage. I feel like it wasn't about me. It was about the theater. And my timing has to be slower. When you're playing a theater, you have to slow everything down. And to be in a 400 seat theater that is just, people are packed, the audio, the sound and the lights. He did a beautiful backdrop. I didn't have to build a backdrop for the special. I just used what he had. Had beautiful lights set up and curtains, and then obviously the crowds that they've culled in Austin are they're educated comedy fans that know what's good and are not judgmental. You can do any kind of material and they go with it. And yeah, I just loaded in a crew. We shot 2 shows. And when I saw it on the screen, I was like, oh my God, this is beautiful. This looks great. So yeah, I can't thank Joe enough for the opportunity. I was only the second person to do a special there. Brian Simpson did one before me. And
Yeah.
so, people aren't sick of that background yet. I got it while it was still fresh.
Yeah, Doug Stanhope shot something too. It was in the middle of the day. I was actually at that show, but for some reason he's just decided to bury that one.
I think he didn't bring in a camera crew. They have like a camera in the ceiling of the club that they use just to feed into the green room. Like Joe wants it so that you can sit in the green room and you can watch the show. So
Yeah.
there's two flat screen TVs in the green room, and because there's 2 rooms and you can watch and you can switch on the volume for either one and watch the show. So that's what Doug used for his special, just the feed from like a security camera, basically.
That would actually fit for his style. It's like you're getting
Yeah.
the stand-up special on the security camera. I think the Stanhope crazies would love that.
Well, yeah, I remember his headshot for 20 years was just him in a photo booth in New York.
So Austin feels a lot like the Boston that you were coming up in the late 80s and early 90s, where you guys, and I've talked to David Cross about this, but you and Cross and Louie and Marin and Joe, I mean, y'all were going wherever to get stage time. A lot of times it was in, gosh, Chinese restaurants.
Yeah.
Austin's got something like that going on now too.
Yeah, I've heard
Pretty
that.
clunky setup because I'm not going to ask about that necessarily. I've heard you in talking about just figuring out your own style in Boston, mentioning the Lenny Clarks of the world versus the more cerebral comedians. And I've heard you mention Bill Hicks specifically, who was obviously really coming into his own at that time. Did you ever spend any time around Bill Hicks, considering how fondly people around here think of the late, great Bill Hicks?
Well, yeah, he had a huge influence on the Boston scene. And I think Joe in particular, Mark Maron in particular, drew a lot from his not giving a shit what the crowd was thinking about your material and for really going deep and challenging the audience. So I only had one night, I had one very special night. It was actually me and Rogan, and we were at the comedy Faneuil Hall Comedy Connection, and Bill Hicks came in, and the crowd was pretty full, and he went on and he started walking people. Like people started getting up and walking out on because they like his controversial material, and he loved it. He would say, "Okay, and we lost 2 more. Look at him running for the exits," and he just lost half the crowd, but then the other half that stayed was like killer. He just destroyed, and then he came back and we got to sit with him in the green room a little bit. And yeah, it was one of the great comedy nights of my life.
Oh, that's really cool. All right, last question now, Greg. I love stand up. You love stand up. What do you love about stand up comedy?
I feel like it's like a rodeo. You're one second you're sitting in the back and you're watching the other comics and your heart rate is at 80 or whatever heart rate stay at. And then they say your name, and no matter what my mood, like I said, I have depression, and it's like I get on stage and the immediacy of being on the bull, like you just have to get present. Your mind and your body and the audience all have to be in sync. And it forces you to push everything aside, all the baggage and, the moods and whatever. And you just are there. I can't tell you how many nights I've driven to the Comedy Store and been like, I can't do it. I'm not feeling it. I don't want to be doing this right now. I want to get back on the couch with my wife and watch Netflix, which is where I was 15 minutes ago. And then I'm driving home and I'm smiling and I am in a great mood. And during the pandemic, I didn't have that. I had a year and a half of not getting that drip of dopamine or that blast of dopamine. And it took a toll on me. And so, yeah, I like that once a night, sometimes twice a night. I get to go up there and I have to just cut the shit, and I have to get to that place where I can relate to people and make them laugh.
And you've done a great job of that for a long time now. The latest special, You Know Me, is available on YouTube. Great special, highly recommended. Don't have a chance to see Greg Fitzsimmons here in Austin anytime soon. He was just here in town over the summer around the time that the special came out. But do check that special out through YouTube. Also, find his podcast through his website, gregfitzsimmons.com. Greg, I appreciate you humoring my consistent efforts to get you on the show for the last little bit now. Thank you for finally making it happen, man. It's always a pleasure getting to talk to you, and I look forward to the next time.
Always a pleasure. You're one of my favorites. Thanks so much for having me on.
If you're still watching or listening on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or elsewhere, I would greatly appreciate you subscribing to this show, and please do like today's episode. Thanks to Gentleman Jesus for the intro and outro music. Hear more of his work at gentlemanjesus.com. Thanks to you for hanging out. For more of the show and to connect on social media, visit booksonpod.com. Talk to you next time. Books on Pod.